At the beginning of the movie, we meet John Brickner, who has just been released on parole after serving 4 years of his 7-year sentence. He was granted early release due to his exemplary behavior and the remorse he felt for killing a man. John relocates to Seattle and lands a job as a construction worker. One night at a bar, John witnesses 2 men harassing a waitress. He intervenes and demands that one of the men apologizes to the waitress before kicking him out of the bar. The bar owner is impressed with John's actions and offers him a job as a bouncer. John also faces mistreatment from his construction job boss. At the bar, John breaks up a fight between 2 patrons and ejects them from the establishment. Due to his display of strength, someone offers John a job, but he declines. One day, the wife of the man John killed, Veronica, approaches him on a construction site. She tells him she's applying for parole, but blames him for her husband's death. Veronica also reveals she didn't apply for parole earlier because of John's messages. She asks him to pay $250,000 for her daughter's heart transplant. John counts some of his money and stashes it in a ventilation hole. Later, the bar waitress tries to get John to count his money, and he asks her to help him locate the person who offered him a job. She takes him to Reno, who is recruiting fighters for legitimate competitions. John declines the offer after finding out about the job. Reno attempts to persuade John to stay by promising him a substantial sum of money if he participates in the fight. One day at work, despite John's hard work and dedication, the manager fires him. Suddenly, the principal has a heart attack, and John comes to the rescue until the paramedics arrive. That night, he visits Veronica and informs her that he cannot afford to pay for her daughter's surgery. Veronica begins to shout at John and shows him the letters he wrote to her while he was in prison. Sarah, her daughter, comes out due to the commotion, and her mother tells her to go back to bed. But Sarah introduces her doll to John, which makes him feel sorry for her. John assures Veronica that he will try to help her. John goes to the fighting ring and competes in his first fight as a replacement for an unconscious participant. Despite being bitten, John manages to defeat the man. John splits the prize money with the other participant who lost consciousness since he assisted him in obtaining the money. When John arrives home the next day, he finds Reno and Frankie in his room. They request that John participate in more fights because he is generating money for them, and they require it. Then they meet with another person named Deacon, who is an investor. Reno desires John to be given an opportunity to fight since he is skilled, but Deacon refuses, stating that no one can trust John and that there is no long-term guarantee. John requests a private conversation with Deacon and promises to get the money. Reno owes a man named Nestor money, and he sends his men to kill Reno. John steps in and suggests a fight between him and one of Nestor's men to settle the debt, and the loser pays $10,000. Nestor agrees, and they begin fighting amidst a pack of dogs that attack anyone who comes close. Despite the intense battle, John wins, and he and Reno finally have enough money to see Deacon. Veronica calls John, but Frankie notices her name on John's phone and asks about it. She shares her history with Reno and how he saved her life, but John isn't interested. Instead, he asks her about what Reno pawned. Later, John goes to the hospital to visit Veronica, and he finds out that Sarah's health has worsened, and she was readmitted to the hospital. John assures Veronica that he's doing his best to earn the money for Sarah's surgery. She tries to be patient, and John promises to keep working for the money. While at Reno's residence, Frankie recalls the name of someone who would help them, but Reno tells her to wait as they just resolved the issue with Nestor. Frankie empathizes with John and tells Reno that John is not a dishonest person. However, John becomes furious upon hearing this and informs Frankie that John was imprisoned for killing. John questions Frankie if she thinks John is a good person and reminds her that they need money to pay their debts. Although John overhears their conversation, he remains unaffected. Later, John participates in several fights and emerges victorious. John returns to Frankie's place alone and inquires about her sewing skills and why she did not attend medical school. In the meantime, while Reynaud was with his friends, Val's men approach him, beat him up, and demand a payment of $250,000, the amount Reynaud owes to Val. Val's men threaten to harm Frankie if the amount is not paid within a specific time frame. Subsequently, Reynaud arranges a fight between John and one of Nestor's men. The fight is challenging, and John takes several hits, causing Frankie to attempt to stop the fight. Nevertheless, John persists, encouraged by Reynaud, and eventually knocks down his opponent. Later at the celebration, Reynaud reminds everyone that they still need to wait for something. Suddenly, John receives an emergency call from Veronica and rushes to her apartment. Upon arrival, John discovers a letter from Veronica informing him that her request for a donor was denied. He finds her attempting to take her own life in the bathroom and rushes her to the hospital. In the hospital waiting room, Frankie inquires about Veronica's condition, and John shares the entire story with her. While talking, John notices scars on Frankie's wrist, indicating that Reynaud had saved her life once when she tried to commit suicide. Meanwhile, John visits Veronica to encourage her not to lose hope. She expresses regret that she couldn't give her heart to her daughter, Sarah. John promises to make the money to help Sarah. To get the money, Reynaud sets up a fight between John and another fighter, with a prize money of $250,000. Vel's men lock Reynaud in the bathroom, and Frankie becomes upset with him for not informing her of his plans. During the fight, John emerges victorious, but Nestor demands that the fight be to the death. John refuses and ultimately loses. As John and Frankie embrace, Val's men viciously beat Reynaud. On the way back, John learns that Val is the one to whom Reynaud owes money. John tells Frankie that she should have informed him about Reynaud's debt, but Reynaud claims it's not John's problem. Once, John notices a car that has been following him for days. He gets in the car, and they drive him to an elderly man who tells him that he owes John a debt since John saved his brother-in-law while working as a construction worker. John explains that he needs money for a heart transplant for a girl named Sarah, and it becomes clear that this person is Vel, who Reynaud owes money to. Vel offers John two options: either pay off Reynaud's debts or let Vel help John get the money for Sarah. John chooses to help Reynaud. As John accompanies Veronica to her residence, she opens up about her life, sharing that her promised accomplishment is raising her daughter. John reveals to her that he acted in self-defense and did not intend to harm her spouse. Seeking assistance, John pays a visit to Deacon, who declines to help. Faced with limited options, John returns home and prepares to depart, while Reynaud arrives to express gratitude for John's aid in settling his debts. In a separate conversation, Frankie recounts how Reynaud rescued her from financial trouble. Reynaud receives a phone call informing him of an upcoming fight. The match starts after an unidentified individual shoves John. Soon, the atmosphere becomes tense as the men engage in a challenging brawl. When John and his adversary tumble to the ground, it appears that John has succumbed, but he is coated in an unusual substance. After rising to his feet, John inquires do they continue, but John ultimately emerges victorious from the intense struggle. Veronica secures a donor and successfully saves her daughter's life. John returns to Reynaud his father's cufflinks, which he had bought for him from the pawn shop, bringing closure to that matter. In an act of reconciliation, Reynaud and John hug and set aside their past disagreements. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the movie, please like the video to show your appreciation. See you soon.